Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. Assalamu alaikum, peace be unto you. We want to welcome our friends in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. I am pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. Today's broadcast is going to be in two parts. The first part deals with Canada, and the second part will deal with India. I should also note that I am on a human rights road trip along with one of my board members of the Afia Foundation. It's a road trip into the southern part of the United States. We spoke in Alabama on Friday, and today we're coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia, from the greater Atlanta, Georgia area. From here, we head into the Carolinas, inshallah ta'ala, on making our way back north toward home. But again, today's, and I should also note that today's location is coming courtesy of Masjid Furqan. It's one of the beautiful, it's one of the rooms in this beautiful masjid located in Marietta, Georgia. So we want to make a special note of thanks to the administration for according us this courtesy today. Our first guest, and I'm looking forward to this conversation, is with us, our sister Zainab bint Yunus. She is a Canadian Muslim woman who's been engaged in grassroots dawah, activism, and writing for over 16 years. She is a co-founder of MuslimMatters.org. She has written for numerous publications and is particularly interested in advocating for Muslim women's rights. Without any further ado, let us bring our sister on. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Zainab.
Wa alaikum salam. Allah.
First of all, I want to say thank you for making yourself available for this very important conversation. You know, Sister Zainab, I in preparation for this discussion of ours, I put the following words into my computer's search engine. Does Canada have a Muslim problem? And I received a plethora of results.
Yes.
Clearly, Canada has a Muslim problem. What can you tell us about it?
So unfortunately, Islamophobia in Canada is actually a very serious issue. And a lot of people think, Canada's not like that. Everybody has a very idealistic idea of what Canada is like. There's the idea that Canada's so different from America. We don't have racism here. We don't have Islamophobia here. Everything's just, wonderful and happy and jolly. It's not. Canada, like America, was founded upon the genocide of Indigenous peoples, and racism has been embedded in Canadian society since it was established as a nation state. And that did not stop with just the Indigenous peoples of Canada. It also extended to pretty much everybody of color, and that included Muslims. And Islamophobia in Canada did not begin with 9/11, and it certainly hasn't ended anytime soon. I would say that, so I grew up in Canada pretty much my entire life, and I have memories of Islamophobic incidents that took place when I was very young, and this was before 9/11 ever happened, although it certainly spiked afterwards. And of course, this is due to the same kind of Islamophobia that already existed in media, in movies, the idea that Muslim/brown people /black people are the bad guys, they're the villains, especially in Hollywood movies. There was always, the implication that, they are the other, that such people are not truly Canadian, so on and so forth. After 9/11, it definitely got a lot worse. And Islamophobia exists both in the systemic level and societal level in Canada. Under Stephen Harper in particular, when he was prime minister, we went through a really rough time where there were, niqab bans constantly being pushed. There were overt, explicit attacks on Islam and Muslims, definitely trying to portray any Muslim Canadian as a danger, as a threat. That did not stop when Stephen Harper stepped down from his position as prime minister. It continued, and we see this today with Quebec has ongoing, legislation targeting niqab, hijab. The most recent one that I can think of, I think, is Bill C-21, which prohibits religious symbols in any public government position. That includes teachers. So a hijabi teacher actually lost her job because of that legislation. And then, of course, we've had multiple just Muslims being attacked, especially visible Muslims. So unfortunately, primarily Black Muslim women in hijab. And this, I think there were over 10 incidents in the province of Alberta alone, and Edmonton specifically, just over the last year and a half, which is absolutely wild. And last year, in 2021, in the summer, an entire Pakistani family was murdered by a man with explicitly Islamophobic motivations. I personally, I live in the West Coast, so very liberal part of Canada. Everybody is just very hippy dippy. And yet even here, I've experienced so much Islamophobia, whether it's random comments. There was somebody on the bus threatened to stab me with knives. There's just been a lot that has happened here. So we have a very, very big Islamophobia problem. That's not even including the government's practices. There was Omar Khadr, who was sent to Guantanamo Bay, and he was a Canadian citizen. He was a child at the time. He was a teenager. I think he was like 14 or 15. The Canadian government sent him to Guantanamo Bay, and he was tortured, and the government didn't want to bring him back to Canada. There's the case of Maher Arar, who the RCMP lied about and had sent over to Syria to be tortured. He eventually was able to sue the Canadian government, and he won that settlement, alhamdulillah. But the fact is that the Canadian government is fully complicit in the systemic Islamophobia. And again, that doesn't even begin to cover the role of security intelligence agencies, the way that there's illegal surveillance and monitoring of Muslims, targeting of Muslim organizations. The list goes on and on.
Mm-hmm. Is there any particular part of Canada that is where this problem is more endemic, or is it throughout?
It's throughout the entire country. Like I said, I'm from one of the most liberal provinces. I think it is the most liberal province in the entire country. And we are still dealing with it at a pretty bad level. I mean, I know in my local community, we've had, spies and moles come in. We've had people actively engaging with law enforcement and security intelligence agencies to snitch on other Muslims, to get them in trouble. I know my own family's been monitored for many, many years because of our role in dawah. So it doesn't matter where in the country you are, this stuff happens.
Wow. This comes as a shock. Really, it does, because, back from actually the 1960s, when, you had all of the tumult surrounding the Vietnam War, and the opposition, the growing opposition to it, and the demonstrations in the streets. Canada was one of the favorite spots to go to in order to avoid the draft. And you had many folk, especially many young Caucasian males, that found their way into Canada, and there were males of other tribes as well. But Canada was known as a place of refuge for those who needed it. And so, I'm sure that it will come as a shock to many who will see this, who are watching this broadcast live and listening to what you're saying, and others who will see it later as the links are shared, that Canada has this kind of problem. It certainly came as a shock to me, and I'm a fairly well-informed brother, but it came as a shock to me that of course, when what was an eye opener for me, what I guess began the process of me seen through the tinted glass was when that family was killed,
Yes.
just deliberately mowed down in a very savage way, the way that they were. And then I began to hear little bits and pieces of other information about attacks that have taken place.
Yeah, we had the Quebec City message shooting in 2017, I believe it was, and that was actually incredibly fatal. Like a man walked into a masjid first during the time of Salat al-Isha, and he deliberately just opened fire on the entire masjid. And again, that was done deliberately with Islamophobic motivations. And the horrifying part of it was that when he was taken to court and charged, and he was found guilty, but the fact that the sentence he received, like he was eligible for parole, I think, in like 20 years, and this man killed multiple people.
Mhm.
And it was for Canadians, a lot of Muslim Canadians were in shock. I personally feel that because of my personal family background, where we are acutely aware of this kind of thing happening, we're not, we don't fool ourselves into thinking that, oh yes, everybody loves us and everybody wants to be our friend. Again, like we are very visible Muslims. As you can see, I wear niqab, my mother wears niqab. Pretty much my entire family is very visibly Muslim and always has been. And so when we go out in the world and just living everyday life, and you see the kinds of responses that you get, even in terms of how people look at you, the comments that people make, the assumptions that people make, I'll have plenty of well-meaning non-Muslims come up to me and say things like, oh, you're in Canada now, you don't have to wear that. Or, oh, and it's like, yeah, I know I'm in Canada. This is why I wear it, because I can. And they're very shocked that I can speak English flawlessly. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's my first language. I should be able to speak it. Or when the best part is when I have white people talk to me and they've got an accent because they're from somewhere else. They're from a European country, and they'll try to tell me about Canada and freedom of whatever in Canada. I'm like, yeah, I've been here longer than you have. And they're always very taken aback. But like I said, with Canada, we have an international image of being, this utopia, and it's the reality is not that way. I mean, alhamdulillah, it is better than America in a lot of ways. I will give us credit for that much, but
Yeah.
it's really not that much different when you boil it all down to the essence of how was this government established? What are the government policies? Who are the people behind those policies and the legislation? It was so jarring when the Afzal family was murdered, and literally days later, you had Doug Ford out in Ontario, he and his political party did not even want to recognize a motion to recognize Islamophobia. And it was played off as a political game, but that really tells you what certain types of politicians think about Muslim lives. The fact that you don't want to support a single piece of paper that has no meaningful legal repercussions, but just says, hey, Islamophobia exists and it's a problem in Canada. They didn't even want to do that much. What does that tell you?
And how does the Trudeau administration compare to previous administrations on this issue?
I will say that the Trudeau government it plays the political game. It's the Liberal Party. So, of course, they sound like they're allies. They sound like they're wonderful. But guess what? Under the Trudeau government, CSIS is still monitoring Muslim organizations, Muslim individuals. We still have the Canadian Revenue Agency being used alongside CSIS to target Muslim charities and organizations. There's a report that came out that said, this is including the Trudeau government, that the CRA has stripped charitable status from, I think, 70 out of all the organizations that the CRA stripped charitable status from. 75% of those were Muslim organizations with no charges laid, no accusations of anything, no terrorist funding, nothing legally to charge them with. And yet those Muslim organizations had charitable status stripped from them. Why? Because they hosted imams or guest speakers who expressed opinions, often Islamic opinions, that the government does not want perpetrated and shared. And we're talking about very basic Islamic beliefs, okay?
Yeah.
Disagreement with political policies. You have the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, is very active in going after Muslims and targeting Muslims. So again, systemic Islamophobia exists no matter which government is in power. One of them is just overt about it, and one of them plays nice and pretends like they care about us. but they're still perpetuating the exact same policy. So I have a very bitter, cynical view of politics in general. And after, having lived under the Stephen Harper government and seeing the Trudeau government now, again, it sounds very pretty. It sounds very nice. Like, oh wow, Trudeau cares about us and he shows up at these events and he goes to masjids in Ramadan. Okay, and the policies that are oppressing us, that are targeting us, are still in play.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of on politics, how much of a presence do Muslims have in the politics and the political offices in Canada, and has that made any difference?
I would say that unfortunately, Canadian Muslims have for a very long time, and they continue to operate on the platform of let's integrate, let's assimilate, let's prove that we're just like everybody else, let's play nice and play according to everybody else's rules. And so while we might have plenty of Muslims in certain political parties and running for office in different capacities, what ends up happening? No change whatsoever, because they end up being part and parcel of the system and they're not necessarily challenging it. We've had so many, again, like it disturbs me to see how many Muslim organizations and again individuals who go into politics, they have to join a political party. They don't speak out against the policies that even their party is privy to and part of perpetuating. Again, it's pretty much unanimous, the systemic Islamophobia against Muslims, whether again CSIS as the National Security Surveillance Agency, like going after us, or RCMP or the CRA or any of those major institutions, they are never challenged by the Muslims in political office, because if they do, then they're going to get kicked out of their positions. So it's really, I feel like, unless we have people who are willing to stand by principle instead of towing the party lines, it doesn't matter how many Muslims you have in political office, it's really not going to change much. If there are any changes, they're very, very minuscule. And the things that do change most with Muslim political involvement are very like grassroots level. So again, like maybe if you're able to impact the school board in some way, or talk to a local police department, maybe that has some kind of impact. But unfortunately, we really have not seen much meaningful impact on a wider political scale.
Yeah, it does indeed appear that Canada has the same problem that America has in terms of Muslim involvement in politics. We want a seat at the table, and we take pride in having a quote unquote seat at the table. But
half the time we're the meal.
Yeah, more often than not, that's the case. We have to raise our level of consciousness and our crystallize our principles and be willing to stand and speak truth to power, as we are required to do according to the Quran and the prophetic Sunnah. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, when you see an evil action, change it with your hand. If you cannot do so, with the jihad of the tongue. If you cannot do so, detest it within your heart, and that is the weakest degree of faith. And we have got to, for those of us who are in positions and we're in places, we're in countries where we have access to the jihad of the tongue, we should be engaged in it far more than just being like the magicians at the time of Pharaoh, who, when they asked the Pharaoh, what will be our reward, he said, nearness to me. We have to break free of that desire of just wanting to be near, quote unquote, near to power, and
absolutely,
and really do something with it. I mean, there are things that Muslims can do who find their way into government offices, but it's got to be about principle and about your values being where they're supposed to be, and having the courage to do what you're capable of doing. What about human rights organizations in Canada? How effective have they been in pushing back on Islamophobia?
Not much. Again, a lot of it comes down to there's more awareness. I'll give certain organizations that. There's more awareness that Islamophobia exists. There's more awareness. I think it stops there. I think the awareness is there. Islamophobia exists. It's a problem. Okay, but now what are we doing about it? Not a whole lot. So I was actually really upset this year. We actually had for the first time, National Day of Remembrance and Islamophobia Awareness. And this was January 29th, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm.
And the National Council of Canadian Muslims is a big organization in Canada, and they were able to lobby for this day to be recognized by the government or whatever. And so I sat in and observed a number of online events that were held for this day, right? And they included a lot of politicians and whatever. And I was actually really disgusted. I was completely disgusted by the fact that instead of taking those events as an opportunity to really hammer in the point that systemic Islamophobia is a problem alongside societal Islamophobia, we had all these Muslim organization representatives basically sucking up to politicians and be like, you guys are so great for just showing up here. And the worst part to me was that the politicians who showed up, they were clearly reading off a script. They were, for the most part, disinterested. It was literally just a PR opportunity. They showed up for like 2 minutes. Oh, yes, Islamophobia is terrible. We feel bad. We're all in this together. It was quite offensive at one point where one politician, he just started talking about anti-Semitism. I'm like, why are you talking about anti-Semitism when this is about Islamophobia? Do we show up at Jewish events and start talking about Islamophobia at your events when it should be like Holocaust remembrance? No, we don't. So why do you think it's okay for you to come here and co-opt our day of Islamophobia awareness for your issue? And it was truly offensive in my eyes. And then more offensive was the Muslims enabling all of it, And again, the fact that you had Doug Ford, the same man who refused to support the motion to recognize Islamophobia in the wake of the Afzal murders, standing there with and talking about, oh yes, Islamophobia is terrible, it's not part of Canada. Bro, you are part of the problem. You literally represent systemic Islamophobia in Canada. And then again, the fact that Muslim organizations are enabling this and applauding and like, oh yes, this means so much. No, it doesn't. It's literally just 2 minutes of PR. That's all it is. And anyone with 2 brain cells to rub together can recognize this. So the fact, again, that these events, and then the other one that really bothered me was, again, talking about Islamophobia, and not a single organization, not a single one of those events recognized the role of the government in perpetuating Islamophobia at the systemic level. And it was shocking. They're talking about hate crimes, which, yes, it absolutely happens, and it's definitely a huge problem. But why is there an attitude of acceptability towards these hate crimes happening? Because the government has already essentially informed the masses, like, hey, we target these people, you can too. And again, the whole issue of having Muslims who are working with CSIS, who are working with the RCMP, they're showing up at these events and they're trying to tell us, oh yes, one of the solutions to Islamophobia is we need to work with the government more. And so that was, disgusting. So it was absolutely a farce. It was a shambles. And I have even less confidence in the backbone of Canadian Muslim organizations and fighting against Islamophobia. And it really saddens me. It really saddens me because we have resources. It's not that we don't have resources. And there are some of those organizations are doing some good work. I believe it's NCCM that actually put together the report on the CRA targeting Muslim organizations and stripping Muslim organizations of charitable status. It's like, okay, you know there's a problem, you're aware of the systemic Islamophobia, you're putting together these reports, that's great, but why are you not challenging it now in the moments that it matters most? Like, why would it not come up at all in any of these conversations? On a National Day of Islamophobia Awareness, this is kind of the right time, the right opportunity for you to be like, hey, Canadian government, you're part and parcel of the problem, let's see some change. But there's a lot of dancing around, beating around the bushes, trying to sweet talk the government, and things don't work that way. If you keep sweet talking them, they're just emboldened and enabled because they know they can target us, and we're going to applaud them for it and be nice to them about it. As long as they say to us, oh yes, we recognize Islamophobia is bad, that's good enough for us, really? So again, it's a very pathetic political game, and in some ways I recognize why they think it's valuable, but then I think it's kind of ridiculous for anybody in community activism work not to realize the lessons of history. If you keep enabling the oppressor, what's going to make them stop the oppression?
That's right, sister. If you could wave a magic wand and bring change on this issue to Canada, what would you do? What are some of the things that you feel would go a long way toward bringing about some degree of substantive remedy for around this issue?
I would say that it's engaging in the principled community activism that calls out the problem and demands change. That doesn't sit back and applaud the government for doing not even the bare minimum. And I'll give a personal example. So, what I have been able to do this year since January, I am part of a local Islamic organization. And again, we do a lot of community grassroots dawah. And so I actually reached out to the local police force. And so this is not the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. This is just local Victoria Police Department. And I put together a presentation explaining Islamophobia to them. And I mentioned everything from systemic Islamophobia, societal Islamophobia, examples of Islamophobia in Canadian media and Canadian politics, in law enforcement, in healthcare, in every way you can imagine. And I hammered home, look, you guys need to know about this because this is our lived experience and we don't trust law enforcement, and this is why. And if you want to do something about it, instead of just being performative, you need to engage with us. You need to recognize the issues that we have with you, and you need to do something about it. You need to correct it. And I had really great feedback. And, a lot of them were actually shocked because they'd never heard any of this before. Nobody had ever told them before that they're part of the problem. And nobody had told them what they can do about it. So I presented action items at the end of the presentation. I was like, look, this is what you can do. This is what you need to do. Things like reporting hate crimes as hate crimes, because legally, if a Muslim comes in and says, oh, hey, somebody attacked me while yelling Islamophobic slurs, they can write that down as a physical assault, but they don't need to write down that it was an Islamophobic hate crime, which obviously is going to impact statistics. And so I made a point of saying, like, you need to record it as an Islamophobic hate crime to reflect, so that the statistics accurately reflect the reality. You need to engage with local community organizations, not so that Muslims snitch on other Muslims, but so that we can see that you're doing something about it when we're attacked. So honestly, it's just a matter of having principles, having the guts to do the basic work that needs to be done. And I think this extends from a very community grassroots level. So again, presenting to police boards, school boards, just open community organizations, having open houses and discourse, to holding media accountable. The media plays such a strong role in the way that any news reports about Muslims are reported versus news reports about anybody else. So when the Quebec City message shooting happened, it was shown that Canadian media reported more on the Boston City Marathon bombing, which didn't kill anybody, versus the Quebec City message shooting, which happened in Canada and is infinitely more fatal. So when you see the discrepancy there, that needs to be challenged. When the RCMP comes sniffing around and tries to play chummy with us, we as Muslim organizations need to say, no, you're part of the problem. We don't want you in our masajid. We don't want you snitching on us. We don't want you monitoring us. We want you as a public institution to serve our community, not target our community. So there's a lot that can be done. It just requires the guts to stand up to the system.
Okay, my sister, as I expected that it would, this segment has gone very quickly. I am deeply appreciative to, for having the opportunity to have this discussion with you. And inshallah ta'ala, we are definitely going to have you back, if not for another one-on-one, as part of a panel discussion on this issue. So may Allah ta'ala bless you. May Allah ta'ala protect you. May Allah make your voice effective, and the voices like yours, both within and outside the Muslim community in Canada. May Allah ta'ala amplify those voices and enable us to bring about much needed change. May Allah
Jazakallah khair for having me, and may Allah bless your work as well.
Thank you, my sister.
Right.
Assalamu alaikum wa
Wa
rahmatullahi
alaikum salam.
All right, next up, we have a good brother that's going to be joining me for the first time as well. My brother Shujat Khan was born and spent his early formative years in India. He moved to the US 25 years ago and is an engineer by profession. He follows events in India closely and is a dedicated contributor to the cause of religious minorities in India, especially Muslims. So, without any further ado, let us bring our brother on, Brother Shujat Khan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Mauri. How are
Alaikum
you?
salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brother. Good to have you on, Aki. I should note that my brother Shujat and I, we just met recently through a long-standing friend of mine, in fact, one of the founding board members of the Afia Foundation, Brother Mirza Masood Khan. He now sits on the board of advisors for the Afia Foundation, but he's also one of the principal founders of an organization that has been doing some good work around the issues of, some of the atrocities we've been hearing about, the pogroms we've been hearing about coming out of the world's quote unquote largest democracy. Brother Masood is, again, one of the principal founders of the Coalition of Americans for Pluralism in India, or CAPI. And the brother in front of me is the vice president of this organization that's doing a very noble work. Welcome to today's broadcast of Salam Media, Brother Shujat Khan.
Thank you very much. It's my honor, Brother Mauri.
Aki, this menace of Hindutva, actually the correct pronunciation is Hindutva. Is that
Hindutva? You're correct.
Hindutva.
Yes, you got it right.
All right. This is a fascist ideology that goes back a long way. It's not something that just popped up a few years ago, and it is an ideology connected with RSS, and I'm not going to try to pronounce that. You can do that for us. What that acronym means, but it is something that has raised its head in a very vicious way and in a very muscular way in India for over the past few years. And I would dare say that it has also been an oppressive force in occupied Kashmir, which we don't hear enough about. You tell us about, first of all, the organization. Tell us about CAPI and why CAPI was brought into existence and the work that it does.
Absolutely. Well, before we get into that, I'd like to again thank you for the opportunity to be on this talk show and on Salam Media. And also to all the listeners, I feel honored to be that I'm going to be heard in the land of Nelson Mandela. Also made home by one of my most favorite scholars, Ahmad Didat. May Allah have mercy on him and grant him Jannah.
Ameen.
And of course, the number one ranked team in rugby, the Springboks, right? So from Michigan, go Springboks, okay? So alhamdulillah, what a wonderful day. Glad to be here, glad to talk on this very, very important topic here.
Yes, it is.
Conditions in India, and as you mentioned, a coalition of Americans for pluralism in India. We stand for pluralism, and the acronym for that name is CAPI, C-A-P-I, as you mentioned.
Yes.
So CAPI was started about a couple of years ago, right, when a very dangerous law that was being introduced in the Indian Parliament, a law that could potentially disenfranchise and strip away the citizenships of majority of Indian religious minorities, especially the backward classes. And the Muslims, unfortunately, in India have been purposefully purposely kept back on the economic scale. So when that law was about to be passed, this was a Citizenship Amendment Act, known worldwide by CAA. A couple of years ago, people may remember that there were, worldwide protests in about 45 countries happening against the CAA law. So when that CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act, that was designed to strip away the citizenships of Indian Muslims who have lived in India for generations, who have paid property taxes, who have documentation, who have everything. Yet this law was brought about, and it did unfortunately get implemented as an actual law. So in the backdrop of that, in the city and the state where I live, there was not a platform for people to stand on and voice their concern, to rally around, to show a unity in purpose. And that's when CAPI, Coalition of Americans that stand for pluralism in India, because that's what India is all about, or has been all about, and it's under threat of being made supremacist, fascist, and pluralism being stripped away. So that hopefully gives an idea of why CAPI came about. And 150 people, we kind of got together, we thought about it, we said this ought to be the purpose of the organization, and mashallah, with the barakah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and some sincere, dedicated hard work from our board members and also from a lot of volunteers, alhamdulillah, we feel we have been able to make a difference in the purpose of keeping India pluralistic and a democracy.
Mm-hmm. Aki, Hindutva requires assimilation of all other religions into Hinduism, or elimination of all other religions in India, including the demolition of religious places of Christians and Muslims. Now, with that said, I think it's very important to note that Hindutva and its related tentacles of oppression in India is not the same as Hinduism.
Absolutely not.
And subhanallah, what are some of the manifestations of this forced assimilation that is taking place in India?
Yep. And I will stand on top of the rooftop and the mountaintop and make sure that people understand that Hindutva, this fascist ideology, is not the same as the religion followed by millions and millions of Hindus in India and also all over the world. Having said that, this assimilation or elimination philosophy was first espoused by the brainchild of Savarkar. Savarkar was a guy in 19th century that he wrote the book, and in his book, he explicitly termed Muslims and Christians of India as internal threats of India. Okay, this is in his book. We have a copy on the shelf, and it is sold by all these organizations that espouse, it's called The Bunch of Thoughts. The book's name is A Bunch of Thoughts. So in there he has actually chapters dedicated to how to deal with internal enemies of India, Christians, Muslims, and people who stand for social rights. So that's how it started. And over the last century, this ideology has been basically pushed onto people's minds by going out to less educated areas of the country, by having talking points, by having narrations. They set up the narrative that basically said that Hinduism is under threat, that the 80%, where does this make logic? That the 80% of the country and the population of the country that follows the religion of Hinduism, that they are under threat from a small percentage of minorities, like 5% of Christians. Yet people who did not understand, and in order to try to make that, sell that point, very selective, out of context, examples were taken from history to designate that, hey, here was a Muslim king who did this injustice. Thereby, all Muslims are similar. or there were Christians that were coming by and doing something else. Thereby, that's why Hindus are under threat from Christianity as well. So there are these organizations that took upon that philosophy, that backward-looking, that exclusionary, that supremacist philosophy that is in fact trying to take India backwards. A bunch of organizations in the mid-19th century adopted that and ran with it. One of them, the premier of them, is RSS, which is the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. Now, just the acronym would make you understand it to be that this is a national volunteer force that is going to volunteer and give time and run soup kitchens and all of this. Well, that is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that RSS has, it felt that they needed to be in power in India and control the Indian economics and control the Indian government. So in order for them to do that, their 50-year journey, they took the extremist ideology of this guy called Savarkar and started adopting it and made it their own. And then they reinvented it. And then they spun many organizations from the mother organization, if you will, called the RSS. And now they have over 70 organizations that basically espouse this supremacist, that Hindus are under threat. Hindus have to be supreme. Hindus have to take care of all the minorities, either assimilate them or figure out a way that they don't exist. And that may mean that you drive them out of the country, or you, and very recently, one of the elimination ideas, finally, what's in your heart, if it comes out on your tongue sooner or later. So one of the religious platforms that they have, it's called a religious parliament, if I were to loosely translate Dharam Sansad into English. That parliament basically gave a call to have a genocide against Muslims in India. This is an open call covered by news media, videotaped, in the news, in the press. Everybody covered it. The international media condemned it. But going back to the assimilation or elimination ideology, we are seeing that this is not a figment of imagination of the Muslims. This is not something we are creating out of nowhere. This is at the ground level as real as how you can see me or I can see you.
Tell me something. Is it true that there is an ideological connection between an ideological and a historical connection between this supremacist ideology in India and what happened in Germany during the rise of Nazism? Is there a relationship between the two?
Absolutely. It's funny you say that, because this guy Savarkar, he clearly lists that his motivation in coming up with this supremacist ideology has been the German and the Italian fascist regimes before World War II that led to World War II and led to the destruction of those two countries. After the war, and had it not been America that stepped in and built or helped rebuild Germany and helped rebuild Italy, they were relegated to 200 years behind everybody else. That's how much damage they took on, because they had this. So they had this supremacist ideology, the Nazis and the fascist party. So Savarkar, his inspiration is exactly that. And today, having seen what has happened to the countries and how they rebuilt, and thankfully, somehow that there's a lot of people that seem very inclined and eager to go down that path, and it's illogical. And besides my understanding of how when you clearly have two lessons, and that's fine. This guy wrote an ideology that got adopted by RSS, and RSS, with their hundreds of thousands of street level and neighborhood level branches in India that are called shakhas, where they espouse this supremacy. Understand, but in this day of knowledge and information, where at the fingertips of our knowledge, of our hands, we have phones and devices that can give us the information, and you have so much more to decide, help you decide what is right versus what is wrong, that in this day and age, that lessons from 100 years ago of what took like major economic powers backwards, that
Hmm.
somehow people don't understand that. It just is. It's hard for me to, like Allah Ta'ala says, "Summum bukmun umyun." Maybe there is a curtain in front of the eyes that people do not see. So that it is surprising, but it is true that there is a connection between what was espoused almost a century ago in Germany and Italy and other places to what RSS wants to happen in India.
Yeah. Brother Shujat, as we were segueing from the previous conversation I had with the good sister out of Canada to this one with you, the thought immediately hit me. We often uh, include short videos in the weekly broadcasts, and it just hit me that I wish I had thought to include that little piece of video of the young sister uh, who gets off of her bike, and I'm pretty certain you've seen this. She gets off of her bike and defiantly walks through this angry mob, saying "Allahu Akbar." What is the significance of that little piece of video?
Yes. So that brave young lady that you refer to, she was the background of that issue is that there is a ban that the government in India wants to impose on the hijab in India. The hijab that Muslim women, and there are various other forms where, Christian women have their own version of how they want to dress modestly, and Hindu women as well, and Sikh, and so on and so forth. So hijab is the way that we manifest how Muslim women prefer to wear modest attire. There is a conspiracy. There is an insidious conspiracy to try to rip that right away, despite the fact that today's constitution in India has got articles 25 to articles 30, a total of 6 articles that clearly spell out the rights of religious minorities in India, from the way that the religious places to be maintained, from the way that they will conduct their own religious affairs. There is a Muslim personal law, a law for every person, a personal law board, and it was given, but all of that is now under threat. So the backdrop to this is, going back to the visual of this girl walking past a bunch of young men who are screaming, and they want to let her know at the top of their voices that wearing a hijab is anti-Indian.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why she, I think, comes out with her first response is Allahu Akbar,
Mm-hmm.
to give herself some, willpower, to give herself some, energy to walk past them and to put up with their abuse, because what these young men, they have been brainwashed, I should say. The young men have been brainwashed into thinking that a hijab on a young woman or a woman's attire, as part of women's attire, somehow is hurtful to India. What they don't understand, what these young people have been brainwashed into thinking, that is so wrong. Tell me any nation in the world that has developed economically when their youth have been brainwashed into believing such ridiculous ideas. When has hijab hurt anybody? It is the right given by the Constitution. We are a country that we stand on the world stage. India stands on the world stage and claims itself to be democratic, living by a constitution. Yet the government does not do anything to protect the rights. Yet, not only that, the government is now inclined to support some of these people, the abusers who have stationed and camped outside of colleges, So this college student was not allowed to get into the college. This girl, she obviously does not want to give up her hijab as it's her constitutional right. She makes her way into the yard of the college campus, and then these young, unfortunately brainwashed, wayward young men, smart people, intellectual guys, but their smartness and intellectual ability is not being put to make India progress. It is being made to directed to make India backwards and digress and have these. Their energy should be going in, including the energy of that young woman, should be going into figuring out how to develop the country. Yet, because the government over there cannot create jobs, they have failed miserably economically on every economic index that every other country in the world is measured upon. They have now no other way other to keep these young people busy. So what they have done is brainwash these young men and women that the Muslims, again 10 to 15%, are the reason why the jobs are not there. I mean, it just does not jive. So this is a fight that all of the young women in India, Muslim women especially, are going through. Not just the safety, the security, but also now it has come down to things as ridiculous as, hey, wearing a hijab is anti-Indian. And but my salute, my hats off to all of the women, Muslim sisters in India. Of course, all of the women that face unemployment, their numbers in the workforce are so low. Their education is, the numbers are so low that their rights, their safety. There are so many important issues that women face bravely in India. Yet hijab seems to be the predominant issue according to the Indian government, which is absolutely incorrect.
Yeah, well, this is what makes our sisters are the most identifiable symbol, badge, a reflection of the Muslim presence, which has been for decades upon decades upon decades, it has been, a positive presence in India. I mean, Islam has had in the past a very positive history, and one of the things that folk need to be aware of is the fact that there are over 200 million Muslims in India. It's the third largest Muslim population in the world, and it is the largest minority population of any nation state in the world. And so there is a significant presence. I think if I'm not mistaken, I read somewhere that the person who assassinated Mahatma Gandhi was adhered to this. He was a part of this philosophy. Is that true?
That indeed is. That indeed is true. Again, as I said, India is going or went through a clash of two thought processes or philosophies. The one thought process that was progressive, it was inclusive, it was forward-looking. That was what Mahatma Gandhi, respectfully, he stood for. A lot of the Indian leaders that formed India and formed the government, they stood for. There was another philosophy, which is this RSS and the Hindutva philosophy that we're talking about, which is it's an exclusionary, a supremacist, and a backward-looking philosophy that is seeking to take India backward. So when, Gandhi and the other leaders made a decision in conjunction to have the lines of India nationally redrawn, the RSS did not like the fact, and Nathuram Godse, he's the one, along with, I'm sure, a whole bunch of other people in the background, took upon that Gandhi, what Gandhi did was a sin beyond compare, and that he had to pay the price for that. And that's right. They went ahead and executed the plan that they made to assassinate Mahatma Gandhi. And today, unfortunately, that same assassin who was, later on tried and given the capital punishment. Today they have temples in India
Hmm.
in in
Dedicated to him.
in favor of this guy who killed the father of our nation. That's how much ridiculous and hateful things have become, that and open, and the government doesn't do anything, even though on the world stage this government will go and say, well, we're the government that abides by the principles of Gandhi, but inside India what they do is 180 degrees diametrically opposite of what they claim on the international stage. The government of BJP, which is the political party of the RSS, and the figurehead of that is today's Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. He is the political figurehead in power in the government, but the RSS is the mothership from which he gains energy and ideology.
Okay, my brother, we are in the final minutes of today's broadcast, and this final question I'm going to put to you is may be the most important question of all for this discussion. Why should we in the United States be concerned about what is happening in India? And does the Modi government, does Hindutva and RSS and everything that it has come to represent in the global community, does it have a support base here in the land of quote unquote liberty and justice for all? Why should we be concerned?
We should be very much concerned, and here are the reasons why we should be concerned. With the migration of the workforce throughout, and India being a technological center for IT and other services, India has played an important part in developing, the technologies of nations around the world. So, as part of the immigration and as part of students and people who have come over here, there are a certain portion of undeclared people who have been able to set up similar organizations as what are causing damage within India. So, on this soil, in the land of the free and home of the brave, we have certain organizations that actively are propagating the very same ideology that killed Gandhi. They are infiltrating using public offices and trying to whitewash what is happening in India using this fascist ideology. They are here basically advancing the cause of this fascist ideology, and they work. And there's 300 branches of the HSS, which is the international wing. Not according to me, according to their own website, they draw inspiration from the RSS. HSS is their international branch. And not only are they in USA, but they're in over 50 countries at a minimum. They started in Kenya, they're in Canada, they're in Europe, they're in the United Kingdom, and all they do is they push this. So the concern is, when you already have existing supremacists and other forces here that are white supremacist and KKK and all of you already have a threat. You already have people who are looking to look at the January 6th attack on Capitol Hill. Now you have people that think alike, that want supremacism, that are exclusionary, and think of social and minorities as basically, second or third class citizens. If that, then we have to collect together and be concerned and keep an eye and try to understand the activities that are happening of these RSS offshoots that are here in the USA.
Yes, and beyond the students and the technocrats, we also have politicians.
Yes, sir.
Who are also either overtly or subliminally pushing that very destructive line as well.
They are.
Okay. On that note, my brother, I want to thank you. In fact, I'd like to give you a final minute to share whatever you feel is important to share on this issue with the viewing and listening audience. Final minute, final thought.
Inshallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has called our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Quran as Rahmatul lil Alameen.
Mhm.
He was a mercy to mankind.
Mhm.
And I feel that we as Muslims have a larger responsibility of taking this cause and working for the working for the sake of humanity, whether that is in India, whether that is in looking across religious lines, looking across racial, for Allah has created us from nations and tribe, not so that we can, bias against ourselves, but to identify each of us as being, because we have to take the cause up and work towards it. Muslims have been an active force, but we have to pick up and take upon more of this advocacy, speaking on behalf of the downtrodden, first uplift ourselves and then be able to help the other rest of the humanity as well and become a significant force in it. We have to look inwards and outwards as well. So, in a very large, at a very high level, that is a philosophical change that we have to bring in among ourselves and in our minds that, this isn't about Indian Muslims. Yes, it is, but it is also about humanity in general. No matter wherever persecution is happening, we have to step up and do what we need to do. So,
That's right.
Jazakallah khair for those ending
Yeah.
comments.
My pleasure, my brother. Yeah, as Allah Ta'ala has said in the Quran, stand firmly for justice as witnesses, even if it be against yourselves. And this is what we are commanded to do as conscious and committed Muslims, those of us who are, and may Allah Ta'ala bless those of us who are sitting on the fence and still not certain about where we should be. Yeah, may Allah Ta'ala bless us to come into a full realization of
Inshallah.
what we've been given and what the mandate is.
Yes.
Thank you, my brother, for joining us. Inshallah Ta'ala, we will have you back. On that note, I'm going to conclude today's broadcast as we normally do with a verse from the Quran. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wal Asr. Innal insana lafi kusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amalu salihati. Watawasaw bil haqq. Watawasaw bis sabr. Which means, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, by the token of time through the ages, verily, humanity is in loss. Except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. Peace be unto you. Assalam.